der Sohn der hat ja ein Geschäft, der hat ein Sicherheitsfachgeschäft, der hat dann sein Geschäft also zugesperrt und hat gesagt, erst müssen wir da in Ordnung sein und dann hat das halt mithelfen und die Schwiegertochter und die Tochter und alle und die haben dann noch die Schwiegereltern mitgebracht gehabt, dass wir alles wieder in Ort und Stelle bringen. Gell? Und ja, aber ich meine, das Haus hat einfach gerochen. Das war das ganze Jahr noch die Feuchtigkeit, weil es ist zwar nicht in jedem Keller, aber wir haben es ja gleich wieder weggepumpt, aber das läuft ja doch irgendwo.
Besser.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to my living room. So this is our last lesson and a very special lesson. And I'm going to also try to sum up some things during this meeting. I want to start by saying that my mission at Shenkar College is to expand the perception of art students to another dimension, the auditory cortex. So first of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to expose you to this experience. I want to thank Dr. Freddy Kislev, the head of the art department, for putting his trust in me. And I would also like to thank Professor Oi Cooper, the former head of this department, for including sound art studies in the curriculum in 2017, when I joined the staff, and it was the first time sound art became available to art students in Shenkar College. Last, I would also like to thank Sarah Kostik and Yael Pedro from EMI Shenkar for supporting this meeting, and well, we can start. I highly recommend using good headphones during this meeting, during these 3 hours. So if you have any, that's the time to put them on. And I'm very excited about this meeting. It's a rare opportunity to meet a New York-based sound artist and composer, Annea Lockwood. Throughout the years, Lockwood has been a rigorous experimenter. Her diverse body of work includes collaborations with choreographers, sound poets, and visual artists, electroacoustic performances, recordings, installations, and compositions. She was one of the few bold women artists working in experimental music in a period where this field was still dominated by men. So let's start. She was born in 1939 in New Zealand. Lockwood grew up fascinated by the sounds of nature heard around her family's mountain forest vacation home. She started her composition studies in New Zealand and continued in Europe in various notable institutions, including the Royal College in London. During the late 60s and early 70s, she composed and performed around Europe. One of Lockwood's intriguing early works is the Tiger Balm. A Tiger Balm was released in 1970, and while avant-garde composers frequently used altered and reassembled tape pieces as a disorienting display of mechanized man-made sound, Lockwood took a different approach to tape manipulations. She began with the sound of nature, creating a different kind of sonic space that was more organic. Well, Lockwood has described the piece, originally developed for a theater performance, as a sound ritual. the amplified purring of a tiger fades in, and the sound of this powerful creature is indeed somewhat soothing. The piece gradually introduces an eerie gamelan. This is a gamelan. This gamelan, its chimes accompanying the animals, the tigers, sound contentment, voices of contentment, these purrings. Throughout this 19-minute piece, only 2 sound elements are heard at a time. As the tiger initially fades out, the gamelan accompanies a heartbeat, the combination invoking cinematic suspense that creates anticipation for some unknown danger around the corner. When you hear next, what you hear next is a jaw harp distorted to resemble a slowed down frog. Mid-piece, the sound of a tiger roaring is what sounds like a storm, and it is accompanied by the sighs of a woman in ecstasy. And this juxtaposition suggesting the fine line between animal and human desires. Now I'm going to play it in a share screen mode, but if any of you has any problem like with the internet, I'm going to also include a link here so you can listen to it separately on your computers and come back to us. I think this is a great example of how you tell a story through sounds, how you use very few motives to create this really large-scale story. And I'm going to continue with my presentation. And I used to joke that I live by my ears because I had weak eyesight. Lockwood said that in one of her talks. And in fact, in 1996, she wrote a piece named Ear-Walking Woman for piano, extended techniques for piano. Now, in our previous lessons, we have already discussed John Cage's special piano treatments, for example. We listened to some interludes and sonatas he wrote for his prepared piano with the screws in between the piano strings. We've also heard some of Henry Cowell's music and Pierre Schaeffer's audio experimentations with those extended techniques on piano. And it is interesting to see how this shift of attention from the piano's keyboard to the piano's backstage, the strings, the body of the piano, become such a fertile ground to a new body of works for piano by imaginative, innovative composers such as Annea. And me, I felt a great connection to Lockwood when I found out that, like me, Lockwood grew up as a pianist and wasn't too interested in playing other people's music. She said, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't a passionate interest. And I didn't see the point in replicating other people's music at all. Why do that? So I wanted to strike out in a different direction, not necessarily new. One hopes for new, but that may or may not happen, but a different direction, a fresh direction. And this quote is taken from this one and some others from Pink Noises by Tara Rogers that I've already shown you this book and I highly recommend on it. Now, facing your childhood musical instrument is always a challenge. We've already looked at Lockwood's piano transplants, in which she drowned, burnt, and planted all pianos. And Annea is going to talk about these groundbreaking works soon. In this piece, Ear-Walking Woman, each section is a small sound oasis created with variant objects like stones found on a remote Greek beach, bubble wrap that color all the lower frequencies of the piano, the sound of Super Bowl mallets that sounds like a song of the whales. I'm going to show you how Super Bowls look like. Just a second. I've lost my Super Bowls.
How a Super Bowl looks like. Amazing.
Yeah, wait. So this is how Super Bowls look like. A Super Bowl is simply a silicone ball attached to a stick. And many players just prepare them themselves, DIY. Thing is, once you rub it against metallic surfaces, the friction excites the metal and evokes an abundance of overtones. And all these extended techniques are treated with unmatched tenderness and care. Has his or her microphone open, please, yeah. The work presents materials distributed within the piano to be explored with freedom. The composer closes the overall form, but allows for a great deal of exploration and creativity, resulting in a relaxed and enjoyable experience. This is a quote of Riccardo Descalzo, the pianist whom we are just about to watch. He says, her type of writing has always seemed to be an example to define the most correct, genuine, and sincere way in which a musical idea can be expressed on paper. Again, I'm going to give you the link and I'm going to share my screen, but whoever has issues with the internet, here is the link.
Are you recording the chat as well?
Yes, I mean, I should get it at the end of the meeting. So if you're looking for the links, you can get them from me. Okay,
Thanks.
don't worry about that. Okay, by the way, this is also the time to say if one of you misses some of the links of things we've discussed in our lessons, or I forgot to include them, don't hesitate to write me. There are I'm sure there are another 5 who are looking for the same links. So, Earwalking Woman by Annea Lockwood. Here we are. Oh, there we are. Here are the Super Bowls. So that was Ear Walking Woman by Annea Lockwood. I would like to briefly mention the similar worldview and aesthetics of Annea and another composer and sound artist we discussed in previous lessons, that is Pauline Oliveros. The two were both aware of it, so they set a meeting in 1972 when Oliveros interviewed Lockwood. In the interview, they discussed their mutual interest in meditation and sonic meditation. And this historical recording includes a performance of Annea's serenity-inducing event for multiple hammers, executed by 30 composers and performers. I wish we had the time to listen to it, but we don't. So I highly recommend on it, and I will leave a link in the chat. Okay, so we're moving forward to the last piece I'm going to present before we take a short break, and it's Word Rhythms, which is rooted in field recordings. And I'm going to quote her again. She says, "My fascination with environmental sounds just continues and gets stronger and stronger and goes back a long way. My work with rivers, for instance, I remember starting a river archive in about 1967. It was to focus people on water sounds and their environments. The thread of environmental sounds and concern for the environment continues." I'm a New Zealander. As we said, she was born in New Zealand. Word Rhythms from 1975 originated as a 10-channel as a 10-channel live improvisation in which the audience was surrounded by 10 loudspeakers. The recorded sounds include volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, radio waves, geysers and geysers and pools and tree frogs. These sounds are a physical manifestation of energies that shape us and our environment constantly, energies of which we are not always aware, but which powerfully influence and interact with the rhythms of our bodies. But before we dive into this work, I would like to end up with last quote of Annea. And this quote includes some ideas that sum up this entire semester. And although she relates to the 60s, I believe the spirit is still a key for creating art. She says, I was lucky that my training happened during the 60s. We were really convinced that we could do anything and that it was really fun to do anything. I developed as a personal guideline that when I had an idea, which I thought was unreasonable, that was exactly what I should try to realize. So I followed that for a very long time. It was really a useful guideline that took me in all sorts of directions. But the zeitgeist was this wonderful, sort of bubbling, imaginatively energized sense that categories were permeable, categories were crumbling, and any of us could move into any medium that we needed to move into for purpose of realizing a particular project. It was great. So again, I'm going to include a link if you are having any problems with your internet connection. You can watch it privately. And after that, we will have a short break. And then if everything goes by the plan, Annea will be here with us to present a few works and also have a discussion with us. Carmel is dancing with the, what is it behind you, Carmel? Is it like
clouds?
Clouds. Carmel is dancing in the clouds. Okay.
I made clouds.
So here it is. Okay, so we can start. I'm very honored to present to you all Annea Lockwood, and Cecil, who's talking for the last hour and a half. I can just say
I'm honored to be with you. I've been looking forward to this. Let me start by saying something that I realized a while ago, and it struck me as right on target when I thought of it. That I realized that composing really is the way I explore the world. Different aspects, environment, human experience, non-human phenomena. And for me, sound's by far the most exciting, malleable, and fleeting form of energy in my sentient world. It's the great energy which our bodies cannot resist. And I'm curious about the way sonic energy manifests in different phenomena, from rivers to volcanoes to Nate Woolley, a terrific trumpet player and composer with whom I've been collaborating over the last few years. Energy constantly varying, as Heraclitus famously observed. And I found a translation of that very famous quote recently, which I rather like for its slightly greater complexity. Everything flows. We both step and do not step into the same river. We are and are not. I particularly like the last. We are and are not. Everything's mutable. Everything changes. In the piano transplants, which I understand you've looked at, I'm fascinated by the way, for example, tender shoots of plants can work their way in between the joints of pianos, which are so tightly and strongly built, and with how a piano's sound changes under those pressures. Or how pianos can swell and come apart as water takes them over, or flare up and explode and collapse when fire wraps around them. These are processes, the irresistible transforming power of non-human forces, and watching those processes unfold is the thing which has fascinated me about the various piano transplants as I've followed them over the years in their various environments. The first two images are of Piano Garden in the Gwydir. This piano was installed in the Gwydir Forest, North Wales, in 2013 by Soundlands. And of course, it's a charming image of the little girl and the teddy bear. But Soundlands have sent me various images over the years. And that was a piano right after it was installed. This is what, it was, as per my score, we dug a trench, a sloping trench, and set the piano at that angle, which originally, when I first did it in Ingerstone in England, reminded me somewhat of the Titanic going down. So here's a piano going down. And that's from installation. The second image is what the piano looked like, how the environment had modified it by 2015, only a couple of years later. By now, the framework of the keyboard is still visible. The harp of the piano is still visible. It's not entirely overgrown. And I got a photograph not very long ago, which I didn't send you, but which was charming, of somebody walking up to the installation and just cocking her head and listening. So all the piano transplants are installations, and there's a score for each of them, and you might have seen them perhaps. They're on my website under compositions. You just scroll down to the end of the list, and this is early work, so they're at the end of the catalog. Piano Drowning was recently installed also by Soundlands in an idyllic pond in Wales for just the second time. So those are the third and fourth photographs. If we can. Oh, I'm waiting for you to bring them up on my screen. There you go. Right. The recent installation was only the second time Piano Drowning's been realized. This is the original drowning in a cattle pond on a cattle ranch in Amarillo, Texas. right after installation, and the little family behind the piano is that of Stanley Marsh III, who instigated the piano drowning, asked me if I'd do a transplant out there, and that was what came to mind. Very shallow pond. The score reads, find a shallow lake in an isolated place. The lake should have a clay or some other solid form of lake bed so that it doesn't sink too fast and fall apart too fast. Slide the piano and upright into position vertically just offshore. Anchor it by rope to a stake, for instance, against storms. Take photographs every month as it slowly sinks a few inches per year. I got some photographs, but they sort of tapered off in a while. And I was left to imagine what the piano would sound like and look like a year later. The second of the piano drowning images is the pond from Wales. There you are, which is indeed idyllic. It's gorgeous. It was inaugurated with a stunning composition by a young 19-year-old Welsh composer, Annea Pritchard, performed with Xenia Pistova. And during the performance, a cow poked its head through the branches on the other side, made no comment whatsoever, just listened a little while and wandered off again, which seemed just perfect. The piano is still there. The water level in the pond rises and falls, of course, with the weather, but it's surviving just fine. Piano burning originated as an attempt to make a very good recording of fire in preparation for a dance score, which was never completed. I tried building bonfires in my yard, fires in my fireplace, but nothing had the intensity I wanted. When I came across a sort of piano graveyard, which a London sanitation department used to dump unwanted pianos, it occurred to me that a defunct upright with strings overtuned and very taut might make great sound. So at a small festival in London in 1968, we burned 2 uprights, one in the afternoon and one at night. But sound recording was impossible, which was, of course, the whole point of doing it to begin with. Predictably, but I hadn't predicted it, many people gathered. They were talking their heads off for the first 20 minutes, still pretty vocal about an hour later, and they were highly energized by what they were watching. No recording, but the night burning showed me how exquisitely beautiful the process was visually. At their most intense, the sounds are also stunning. And the band, Clipping, did a special burning in order to record it and released a superb recording on their album, There Exists an Addiction to Blood, in 2019, which they had recorded on 17 microphones, 8 of which didn't survive. The original score encourages you to place a mic which you can afford to lose inside the piano, wrapping the cable in asbestos, which we could still do back then in perfect blissful ignorance, so you could record as long as possible. That's recording in close-up, which is how I most love to record everything. There's a gorgeous recent video of piano burning on the web. Enter Piano Transplants 2021 Vimeo in search, and it'll come up. The burning is at the beginning. This burning was presented by Lawrence English with a very brave pianist, Vanessa Tomlinson, at BrisFest in Brisbane, Australia earlier this year. Also in the fall in Vancouver and Krakow. It's different each time in terms of the speed with which the piano burns, where the flames first emerge, how the frame collapses, and how the person briefly playing a piano responds. I just mentioned that I love recording in close-up. That's because I want people to be able to hear as much of the interior detail of a sound as possible, hearing inside the sound, so that it's not a sensory object, but an experience which affects your body, becomes part of you, which is what I hope will happen if you listen to the river sound maps. I've been working with environmental sound for many years. I'm fascinated by the complexity of their fine details, often unpredictable rhythms, and the sense that I'm listening to other forms of being, other, but on a deeper level, not separate from me. Sound's a powerful channel of connection because it enters our bodies so fast and so directly on many levels, through bones, internal liquids in cavities, and affects blood sugar levels, blood pressure, respiration, muscle tension, pulse rate. The upside of the fact that we have no natural physiological defenses against sound is that we can feel deeply penetrated by it, immersed in it. And when this happens, we're making a form of visceral connection with the source of the sound, I feel. So sound is an intimate channel through which to experience one's environment and sense connection. And one of the most magnetic environmental sounds is the sound of flowing water. Rivers are tangible, physical presences, often mesmerizing orally and visually, and they carry layers of meaning for us. So it's not hard to feel affected by their energy. And there lies connection. Much of their acoustic spectra falls largely within our human hearing range. We can drink them, absorbing them internally. We dive into them, feeling them on our skin. Watch the play of light on their constantly changing surfaces. Smell them. They're accessible to all the senses, and we love to listen to them, in large part, I believe, because of how deeply sound penetrates our bodies. And that listening is just nourishing if you're able to experience it with an open body. I started recording moving water after reading a reference many years ago to an old Peruvian treatment for mental imbalance, taking people to a riverbank for a day, because the sounds of moving water were held to be particularly helpful. And then more recently, I read something beautiful, that water channels were carved into the floors of a hospital built by the Seljuks, the Turkic people, in eastern Anatolia in 1228 to 29, so that the water created pitches and rhythms specially designed to ease those mentally out of balance. Which is a beautiful, sophisticated form of architecture, which needs to be revived. So these references made me very curious about the effects of water sounds on our bodies and minds. And I started recording streams, rivers, springs, anything, any water source I could get my mic on. And by 82, I was recording the Hudson River from its headwaters down to the Atlantic, creating a sound installation titled A Sound Map of the Hudson River for the Hudson River Museum in Yonkers in New York. It's the first of the 3 river archive pieces, and the site where it was presented at the museum was spectacular. One wall of a very large room looked straight across the Hudson to cliffs, which we call the Palisades, on the other side of the river. So you were listening and seeing the river simultaneously at its most magnificent. It was a beautiful sight. After the Hudson, however, I turned back to other forms of composition, not really wanting to be pinned as the woman who, on the one hand, either burns pianos or on the other hand, records rivers. I was returning to writing for voice, for instrumental ensembles, making performance art, electroacoustic tape pieces. But in 2001, I found I wanted to work with the sounds of moving water again. And I mentioned this to my partner, the composer Ruth, who said, "So what river would you like to work on?" And the Danube immediately came to mind. It's a huge, powerful river passing through 10 countries with a very significant human history. And unlike the Hudson and the Housatonic river maps, this one was not commissioned. So I could take my time about doing it. And it did indeed take from 2001 through 2005 when we completed the design of the installation. With typical generosity, Ruth said, "Doesn't matter. Don't bother to look for commissions. That would take a long time. Let's just do it. We can cover it." A small grant got me started, and I'm paid a good fee whenever it is shown in 12 places by now. So the expenses associated with making it have long since been covered, which is not an unreasonable way of funding a passion project like that. It worked out nicely. Between 2001 and 2004, I recorded the Danube then at 80 locations or sites, starting at the sources above Donaueschingen in the Black Forest, Germany, and gradually moving down to the Great Delta on the Black Sea in Romania and the Ukraine. I was gathering the materials for a sound map of the river, which is paradoxical because it's an installation which includes a large actual canvas wall map of the river. That is a fixed image. And the river's recorded soundscapes, which in real time are constantly in flux. So I can say that I recorded the river at Brașov, Romania, but that was hardly the whole sound field at that place. And a few hours later, it might have been much less active, depending on the wind. What I do say is that this particular spot sounded like this at 4:13 p.m. on June 21st in 2004. And that's the information that appears on the wall map. And here's the installation design. If we could look at the two photographs of the installation. And I should look at them myself. There we go. So this was the second showing, the design for the second showing in Ulm, but it doesn't vary greatly from one showing to another. That's the map, which is, I never remember what it is in meters. In feet, it's 3 feet high by 6 feet long. It's really a big map. Next to it is the time display, which is the subsequent photograph, but let's stay with this one for a moment. Yeah, there you go, time display. The time display tracks the sound file so that you, and correlate, and the map gives you a correlation with sight. So by checking the time display, you can figure out which part of the river you're listening to, where you are on the river, essentially. Underneath is what I called at the time a river of rocks. I had collected rocks from the riverbed as I went down the river, wanting a tactile, thinking it might be really nice to give people a tactile connection to the river, the piece being otherwise virtual and sort of disembodied. And that idea came from deciding to have a beer at a monastery in Weltenburg in Germany, right beside the river. The monastery was beautifully, if not perilously situated, actually, on a sort of promontory of the river, right at water level almost. They were famous for being the first organized production of beer in Germany, and it was an excellent beer. And I was sitting there drinking my beer and turning over a rock that I'd picked up, as I compulsively do everywhere, in my hand, and a woman sitting across the picnic bench from me looked at this and said, "Isn't that fascinating? You can see how the river has incised the rock, how it shaped the rock. You can see the river's action right there." She didn't say it exactly in those words, of course, but effectively that's what she was saying. And it startled me, and I realized, here's something which should be included. So I kept picking up rocks, and being somebody who's sort of obsessive about details, making notes on the rock and pencil, each rock and pencil of where I found it, which of course eventually wore off. And I would arrange them along the bottom of the map display, and little by little, of course, over a few years, they disappeared. They were souvenired, which was entirely predictable. And by now, when I show it, I have two rocks, one of which nestles in the other. Large, but not huge, transportable easily, which you can pick up and just hold and inspect closely, very much the way the woman and I were doing in Weltenburg as you listen. So I'm hoping that gives you a sort of sense of tactile connection with the river. It's a 5.1 installation, so 5 speakers and a subwoofer, arranged in a circle, however, not the traditional array of 5.1 speakers. There you go, thank you. And with comfortable seating, that bench was the first shot at seating, and from then on, the seating got softer and softer from one installation to another, as much as possible, with my idea being that the more relaxed your body is, the more your body is open, and the deeper the sound can enter you. The map was made by, especially for the installation, by a cartographer, Baker Vale, and by graphic designer, Susan Heiser. And we became a sort of team and did the Housatonic together subsequently and revised the Hudson River map together. They're great to work with. It's a long river, approximately 2,888 kilometers. So the work isn't short. It's 2 hours, 47 minutes. But the beauty, to my mind, of physical installations, what I've always loved about them is their freedom. You can enter the installation at any time, leave when you feel like it, walk around in the space. In other words, you can experience it in your own time. And as a child who went to a lot of chamber music concerts, quartet concerts, when I was a kid, growing up in Christchurch in New Zealand, being trained very early on, not even to rustle the program, let alone any movements more extreme than that. Something about that freedom I just described of installations is really seductive to me and compelling. I love it. There were 2 questions I wanted to explore making this particular installation. Questions I didn't feel I'd probed hard enough, far enough into with the Hudson River work. What is a river? That is, by that I mean, what is its being, its essence, its nature? And what do rivers mean to us? Why are we so drawn to them? How many of you have got a favorite river hiking trail? Have you? Many of us have. I mean, they're powerful magnets for us, physically, emotionally, intellectually. So in addition to recording at the surface and underwater, I also recorded interviews with people living along the river in their native languages. This is also a river of languages. Asking them, what does the river mean to you first? Then, could you live without it? Oh yes, replied Louisa Reisner, whose pension near Neuburg, Germany, had been invaded by a flood in '99, after which, she said, this house simply stank. The damp lasted a whole year. It wicked right up into the walls. But she turned out to be an exception. For Michael Fröschel, a cabinet maker from Grein in Austria, once one of the most dangerous stretches of the river with many underwater reefs and whirlpools, he said, for me, it's one of the most important parts of my life. Not to live on the Danube would be a catastrophe. I couldn't function. This river, which brings with it a kind of power, but also a sort of crazy energy comes from the current. You have to go with it. I can't imagine living without the Danube. When I'm not up to things, then 2 or 3 hours on the Danube, it's a completely different world. And for us, it influences your mood and your psyche so much that we fall in love with it even more. It's the best medicine for us. And this was a shy man, not used to talking to somebody, to a stranger, I think, at all, but also a bold man whose great joy in relation to the river was going out on the river when it's in flood, moving super fast, when it's in fact illegal to be on the river, in his little boat, his little skiff, and just shooting downstream. A lovely man. What I just read is a translation of what you're about to hear. Let's play the first audio. This is a hydrophone recording I made of a whirlpool near the bank, and Fröschel's voice is mixed in with it.
für mich ist es ein ganzer, einer der wichtigsten Bestandteile meines Lebens, dass ich kann es woanders zu wohnen, nicht an der Donau zu wohnen, wäre für mich eine Katastrophe. Es würde nicht funktionieren. Ja. Ich könnte vielleicht in Mauthausen wohnen oder in Linz wohnen, das ginge noch, dass ich diesen Strom, der so eine Kraft mit sich bringt, aber auch so eine es geht eine irrsinnige Energie aus von so einem Strom. Ja. Das ist, wenn man das merkt, welche Kraft da vorbeischwimmt, ja. Ich könnte mir das nicht vorstellen, ohne der Donau zu leben. Ja. Ich weiß nicht, das kann ich nicht recht gut ausdrücken. Aber, auch wenn es uns persönlich nicht gut geht, wenn wir 2 Stunden, 3 Stunden auf der Donau sind, ja, dann ist es eine ganz andere Welt. Ja. Und aus dem Grund, weil es für uns psychisch und von der Stimmung so viel beeinflussen kann, ja, darum können wir sie immer mehr lieb gewinnen. Das ist für uns die beste Medizin. Ja. Von April bis Oktober kann man alle Probleme wegstecken. Ja. Aber wenn es im Winter, wenn es zu kalt ist, dass man mit der Zille auf der Donau fährt, dann das kann schon eine sehr lange Jahreszeit sein. Ja.
Isn't it delicious? I mean, it's so musical, the river. It's lovely contours, sort of higher and lower pitches, wonderful timing. And those phrases come and go, and there are tiny silences. I love it. I've heard it so many times, and each time it just delights me. It's beautifully intricate. I took part of the recording of that whirlpool and transposed it down a couple of tones, slowed it a little, and then put it into Jitterbug, a piece that I made for the Merce Cunningham Company, as a sort of canon, with the original speed on one speaker and the slightly slowed, transposed version on another speaker, interacting, not an obvious canon, but sort of flowing in and out of one another. It was a lot of fun to do, and it sounded very nice that way, bouncing across a large performance space. Yeah. And something that constantly fascinates me with hydrophone recordings is the apparent discrepancy between what can be quite a lot of motion on the surface and much calmer motion right under the surface. That difference is always fascinating to me. That was truly a whirlpool there.
Sorry for a second. I would like to stop for a second and say to the class, Mouse Cunningham, we did mention his name. He was John Cage's partner and a notable choreographer working mainly in New York. Sorry, I had to make sure.
Context is everything. So, and here's Fröschel again describing a particular hissing sound made by small rocks and gravel as they're sluiced rapidly downstream by the current. He's saying, when you go upstream, there are no dams anymore, and the Danube flows much faster. Then you can hear the Danube sing. When the current flows at its original speed, meaning outside the control of a dam, uncontrolled by dams and weirs, when the current flows at its original speed, you can hear the gravel on the bottom hissing, which we call the Danube singing. Fishermen know that sound very well, I've discovered since. They hear it by just placing the end of an oar up to their ears. And so they know it really well, and you find it everywhere. And I had I found this recording downstream from Grein, where Frischer lived, where I talked with him, at Oberkienstock in Austria. But I'd already heard it way back in Ulm without realizing what I was hearing in 2002. And it scared me. I was using a very high-powered US Navy surplus hydrophone I borrowed from a very good friend, Maggie Payne. And one doesn't normally borrow equipment. It feels, it's a sensitive thing to do. And I was amazed Maggie had lent it to me, bless her. I heard that sound. I thought I'd fried the electronics of the mic. And I remember filling a bathtub in my pension in Ulm and sticking the hydrophone in the bathtub to make sure to see whether it still functioned. And of course, everything was fine. It was the river. I'd never heard that sound before. Here it is. Oberkienstock, a hydrophone. Gravel.
Aufwärts fährt, dann hat man zwar die schönere Landschaft, ja, weil die Berge links und rechts hinaufgehen, aber wenn man stromaufwärts fährt, dann ist kein Staubereich mehr, dann gibt es wieder mehr Schotterbänke am Rand, am Donauufer liegt der Kies und Sand und die Donau fließt viel schneller und dann hört man auch die Donau singen. Wenn die Donau in der Originalgeschwindigkeit fließt, dann hört man den Schotter am Grund rauschen und das nennt man die Donau singt.
So there are 11 interviews in the work. They're all translated into the language of the country in which it's being shown. So it gets translated into German and Hungarian and Romanian and various languages, assembled into a hand-sewn book and placed on a table in the installation. They are reproduced in the triple CD that Lovely Music put out of the work, and unfortunately not online. So Ruth and I would drive. We'd pick up a sort of beat up car, usually somewhere like Vienna or Budapest, a rental car, drive to a likely spot. We carried a lot of maps with us. And then I'd walk along the bank. I was listening for water sounds with some new or beautiful aspect I hadn't heard before, but also listening to the riparian environment and listening for environments which would bring, if I recorded them, some aspect of the river's world into relief for listeners, such as large flocks of geese grazing on weeds near the bank in Bačko Novo Selo, Serbia. Geese can be found all along the river, especially the more rural middle and lower Danube, but you find them everywhere. I began to associate them with the Danube. This looked like an unusually large flock of geese, maybe a combination of several local flocks. And I wanted to get right in the middle of the sound, of course. I wanted to record enough and close up as usual. So I figured if I walked very slowly and just held the mic sort of gently in my hand at my side, they might tolerate my presence. So that was fun. I remember walking extremely slowly into the middle of this flock, and the sounds, and then I realized how their cries were bouncing, reverberating, bouncing off tree trunks across the river. So that was a very nice recording experience. And here they are. There's a prima donna mixed in there who you'll pick up. So these are geese at Pačko Novo Selo. That was a lot of fun to do. There are a couple of photographs I threw in. One of recording at Gaydelak in Hungary, right by the river. I wanted to pick up the voices of fishermen nearby, conversations, eavesdrop, but also there was some nice wave action against those steps. So the next two photographs. And the second one, I'm setting up to record. We click on through the time display. There you go. We listen, here's Gaydelak. Yeah, there we are. I was using very simple, very portable equipment, minimal equipment, a little DAT recorder, a Sony DAT, headphones, various mics, but my principle is always that my equipment should never be so elaborate that I can't carry it on my back in a backpack. So backpackable, minimal setup. And the following photograph is, in the following photograph, I'm setting up to record with a hydrophone at Sulina, the big Romanian port on the Black Sea. The hydrophone's dangling off the end of a sort of fishing pole that's designed for use with microphones, actually. And the recording was absolutely no good. There was nothing going on down in the river, as I recall. I mean, it varies according to time of day and temperature and so on. It varies considerably as to just how much aquarium, fish and insect activity there is going down in a river, and sometimes you can hear absolutely nothing except a few stones moving around, and sometimes it's really lively. But anyway, that's what it looked like to be recording down in Sulina with a hydrophone. I recorded 80 sites, 59 of which are included in the map. And in listening sessions at home after the final journey in 2004, I would select sites according to the criterion, have I heard similar sounds already, in which case that site was chucked out? And a more crucial question, does it sound alive? So people ask me, what do I mean by alive? I know it when I hear it. I know it very clearly when I hear it. It's not so simple to explain semantically. It arises, I think, partly from the intrinsic complexity or layering of the sound's overall texture, partly from its moment-to-moment variability, which keeps our scanning brains, scanning for new information, part of our brains, interested, and partly from how close or distant you feel from the sound, which is mic placement, together with an aesthetic decision. Do I want a wide field of recording or a narrowly focused field? Which feels more appropriate in this place? So I make the selections and begin to compose. And the overall structure is a given with the river map, which is pure joy. One's either moving downstream or moving upstream, following the river's structure. And to me, downstream is a more compelling choice because I want to hear how the river's moving, how it's cutting through mountain ranges towards its dissolution into the Black Sea. I use minimal processing, just equalization, balancing the different registers of the sound a little bit, usually to bring the river into the foreground if there's traffic sound behind it. Once or twice a little reverb and editing. Minimal processing because with all 3 river installations, I aim to allow you space in which to immerse yourself completely in the sound and to feel and to sense the river through its sonic energies. These sounds are never abstractions for me. They're manifestations of something alive, which I hope you will also make contact with as you listen, as the sounds flow through your body and mind. So I'm concerned to place as few filters between the sound and you as possible. And as I mentioned, these sound vibrations are entering your body on many levels, which I see as a form of visceral connection with the sound source, even a feeling of non-separation. So can we act further? And recognizing this non-separation, act from that awareness? In my homeland, New Zealand, the Te Awa Tupua iwi, or tribe, have been doing that powerfully for and with the Whanganui River, which flows through their territory. The iwi have been fighting for recognition of the river as an indivisible and living whole for over 140 years. I remember that river from childhood as this beautiful, calm river flowing through hills and bush, a wild river then, and still now, the country's longest navigable river and the 3rd largest. On March 14, 2017, the New Zealand Parliament voted to pass a bill settling the historic claims of the iwi as they relate to the river. And a highly significant part of that bill centered on, to quote, the legal recognition of Te Awa Tupua as comprising the river from the mountains to the sea, its tributaries, and all its physical and metaphysical elements as an indivisible and living whole. And to concretely implement these rights, the bill established a well-funded office to be the human face of Te Awa Tupua, to act, speak for and on behalf of the river. That office consists of 2 people, one nominated by the iwi, the other by the Minister of the Interior, stipulating that the iwi and the hapu, or sub-tribe of the Whanganui River, have an inalienable connection with and responsibility to Te Awa Tupua, its health and well-being. The river's new status ensures that if the river is harmed now, the law will not differentiate between harming the tribe and harming the river. The tribe believes, as it always has, I am the river and the river is me. The river is kin. And to hear about and learn about that legislation was one of the deepest thrills of my life, I think. And it's legislation which is being emulated in other parts of the world, in various places, Ecuador, even the States, in relation to the imperiled Colorado River, It's being taken up as a model, which is fantastic. It's concrete, doable action. Concrete, doable conservation. Yeah. And recognition of our actual underlying non-separation from the environment in which we live. Let's look at Dusk from 2012, a short electroacoustic piece. So that year, at the end of a recording session for a different composition, Jitterbug, the piece for Merce Cunningham's company, which I referred to earlier, where I did the canon with the Whirlpool at Grind, I asked the American percussionist William Wynant to record a wild track, that is, something unplanned, playing a tam-tam, a large, thin gong, with a Super Bowl mallet. If you haven't come across them, they're very useful. I constantly make them, all of us are anymore. It's a mallet which a lot of percussionists used initially. As I said, a lot of us are experimenting with them in pianos and other, sound sources anymore.
We've listened to board rhythms before, so we saw the pianist with the Super Bowls. Yeah.
Yes, they're wonderful devices. You stick a thin stick, like a kebab stick, maybe, into a Super Bowl. And the friction between the rubbery surface of the Super Bowl and the metal of the gong makes the gong sing in long, smooth, floating phrases, which I love. Willie Wynant does this with the most amazing and subtle control. So we recorded him doing this, and I started imagining how I might make a piece gathered around that sound. It needed a contrast, something I thought really low-pitched and a bit rougher. At the time, I was working with geophysical sounds for a collaborative installation with Bob Bilecki titled Wild Energy. And a marine geophysicist, Timothy Crone, gave me sound files that he and his colleague had recorded of a hydrothermal vent in the seafloor off the coast of Washington State. It's a rather famous vent called a black smoker. Hydrothermal vents are rents in the seafloor through which magma-driven, extremely hot water rises into the ocean, full of chemicals. So the vent pulses and heaves in a very low register, much of it below our hearing range. And I tried these two sounds together, the vent and Willie, and liked the way they interacted very much. So I had my opening for a new piece. Then I began doing what I call forming a vocabulary of sounds which feel as if they belong together, pulling in sounds recorded many years earlier when I was working with glass, and also slowed down bat calls, which I find very intricate, intense, and beautiful. And in turn, the bats and the deep space created by the vents suggested the title Dusk, which is by far my favorite time of day. I can't really describe the ensuing process of composition verbally, but little by little, I find a shape and a flow emerges. And as I put it, the piece tells you what it wants. I was working in the home studio I shared with Ruth, and each morning I'd pour a cup of coffee and go down to the studio and listen to what I'd done the previous day. Often I find that listening cold like that after some hours have elapsed and I'm no longer so in love with my latest move shows me pretty clearly what works and what doesn't. Very early on, I decided the piece would end with that extended drifting phrase of Willie's, which goes on and on, long after you'd think the tam had ceased to vibrate. Really beautiful. So this is a piece made from the pure joy of experiencing these sounds' energy and how they bounce off each other or blend. It was recently played out of doors at dusk in a park at the Sound and Distance Festival in Berlin. I couldn't be there, but I wished I'd been able to hear it that way. Nice idea. So let's listen to Dusk. It's just over 7 minutes. It's barely there at the very end, right? Wonderful decrescendo, wonderful performance of a decrescendo, man. William Wynant is a marvelous musician. And finally, I thought I'd like to leave you with a practice which I love to do, and dusk is a very nice time in which to do it. Listening with. A couple of years ago, standing in my backyard barefoot, listening to everything, checking it all out, I realized I'm not the only listener here. Other beings around me are also listening and sensing vibrations. So I'm actually listening with rather than listening to. It's different. It's different mindset. It's just a switch of mindset, but it's startlingly different. Listening with makes you a part of the environment, right? Listening to separates you just a bit. So here's the way I describe it. I won't read it to you, maybe. It's a little boring to have somebody reading what you can, a text you can actually see. So may I suggest it?
No, please read it to us while we look at the text. Don't forget, most of the students here do not speak English, is not their native language. So yeah, it's just to help them understand the text.
Oh, surely. Okay. Listening with the neighborhood. Listening with an awareness that all around you are other life forms. Simultaneously listening and sensing with you. Plant roots, owls, worms, cicadas, hedgehogs, mutually intertwined within the web of vibrations which animate and surround our planet. Listening to feel I am one with all these beings. I listen to know it. What we are one with, we cannot harm. So, I'd love to chat with you. The sounds that you make involuntarily when something surprises you.
Yeah.
For example, or sounds you make involuntarily when you're experiencing something physical that's delicious. It's interesting to try to push that idea much further. And I mean, I remember once asking Thomas Buckner, a baritone I've worked with over the years, if he could give up control of his voice. And he's a concert singer. So this seemed like something which would be totally impossible to do. But he was the one person I thought I could ask who would tackle that and be up for it, and relinquishing all the control that he'd spent years building, right? All the controlling. And he did it, he did it with total freedom. So Tom ended up allowing his voice, as if it were a twin being inside him, allowing his voice to run itself, to control itself, as it were, without him consciously intervening to shape the sound. And it was really, and what comes out is really fascinating. A little like possession, perhaps. What can happen to the voice, people's voices, if they're truly, if they're going through, if they're working on spirit, working with spirit, and truly allow themselves to become possessed. Or what can happen in ecstatic singing, when the spirit just catches all the whole congregation, and people's voices just fly all over the place in most wonderful ways, from a state of free ecstasy without any intent to control. So I think we probably do that with our voices in more contexts than we, are familiar, usually think about. And it's fun, and it's amazing. And it's also,
Thank you so much.
it's also this experience of seeing oneself reflected in a very unfamiliar way, but it's the self reflecting back to the self. It's worth experimenting with.
I would like to ask you a question. It's more of a philosophical question. You were talking about the fact that sounds deeply penetrate our bodies, and I agree with that. And with so much sound pollution going on around us, especially in the city, Tel Aviv, for example, is contaminated, is sound contamination. There are construction sites everywhere. There's like the highways are just buzzing and everywhere. And when I start this course, the first thing I try to do is cultivate the students to listening. It's as if we lost this primarily condition for music and sound, the actual listening. And it's a really hard thing to do for its own sake. And I was wondering, do you ever feel like when you do your sound installations or you present your audio materials to the audience, do you feel like sometimes it loses its, like you need it, or I don't know, somehow we need to cultivate the audience back to the listening? Sometimes it feels for me, just like in other centuries, people were looking at Picasso and saying, well, my 3-year-old child could do that. And here too, it sounds so, for example, the rivers, it sounds so natural. I understand that there is a lot of editing to do, and these fine tunings are so much sometimes more difficult to master, rather than making all sorts of electronic awkward sounds. So I wanted you to talk about your experience with cultivating the audience and listening.
I can talk about two ways in which I've worked with that. On the one hand, connected to a course that Ruth and I taught in the heart of New York City, and in the heart of New York City's din. And on the other hand, the installations. Let me start with the latter. One of the things I love to do in working with the installations is the design, the physical design of an installation. The challenge of, the challenge of sensing and working out how to physically design the environment around somebody listening in such a way as to draw that person right inside the sound. How can I do that? I feel how I can do it in a sense. I think it through, and I talk to Baker and Susan, with whom I've worked on the design of the maps. But it's a delicate thing, a little like the composing itself is a delicate thing, right? But it's a very much a major part and challenge and a delightful aspect of doing the installations, so that I don't just plonk down 6 speakers in a circle and a couple of chairs and say, okay, this is it. How can I draw people inside? So that's one reason why the book of interviews is handmade. So everything should be beautiful as possible, so that the book should be as beautiful as we can make it. You know, the map should be as beautiful as we can make it. No images of the river, so it doesn't turn itself into a visual display with a soundtrack. No images of the river, but the map needs to be lovely, and it needs to be transparent and easy to use, so you don't have to think through that process. And the seating has to be comfortable. So I gave up on benches very early on, and I've ended up with wild energy, the geophysical phenomena installation with Bob, we ended up putting hammocks in the space. It's designed for an outdoor site in a grove of trees, and we set up a couple of hammocks, and they're so enticing. I mean, everybody loves a hammock. So you walk into the space. If the hammock's free, you immediately want to stretch out in it. Once you're stretched out, your body relaxes. Once your body relaxes, you let the sound in more and more easily, and there you are, inside the sound. So, you know, that's great fun to figure out, and it's a major part of the installations. The other area that I referred to when I said that Ruth and I had taught courses in New York City, we were asked to teach an introduction to music course at Hunter College. Ruth was on the faculty and I was an adjunct together. And we didn't want to do the classic introduction to music course. We wanted to ground the course in people's lives more directly, and figured that living in the city, people are used to turning their ears off, either with buds, you know, in their ears, or just simply training themselves to ignore the sonic environment. So we flipped it, and instead, each week we gave the class a hearing study to do, which was very frequently focused. It was either focused on how their bodies are working with sound, in the sort of simple way of what sort of music, what do you play when you get up in the morning? How fast is it? How, in other words, the energy level that you choose to listen to it, and what do you listen to when you get home at night? But also their environments. And we gave them studies in which we asked them to pay attention to the sounds in their neighborhood, the sounds in the streets through which they walk to get home from the subway. What are they hearing? And this time in the semester, later in the semester, and to just jot down what they hear, so that little by little they were hearing more and more and more and more. And people were surprised by how rich their sound environment really was when they ceased to just shut it off, just a sort of blanket shut off. So we kept that up for a couple of years, and eventually we published that. Yes, Marianne, I'm going to say, I sent you a copy, right? The hearing studies?
No, and I would love one.
Yes, I have it. I will show it to you in a second. Yeah, what was on my desk? 1 second.
Ruth, when Ruth died 2 years ago now, in 2019, one of our former students, there you go, one of our former students who had compiled the hearing studies from our paper copies, asked if I would like her to go through them and edit them, which I thought was a great idea. And then I approached small publishers, Open Space, based in New York. Ben Bartz and colleagues run it. They often publish scores, and asked if they'd be interested in publishing it, and they were wonderful and were indeed interested and designed it beautifully. So those are the hearing studies, and I'll send it to you. But yeah, that worked. People's ears, people learn to selectively open their ears again, I think, is what went on, and learned to pay attention to how their bodies were responding to this sound and that sound, what was going on internally. So, thank you for your answer. Listening to your environment can tend to work, especially if it's an intimate environment. Not just any street corner, but the street corner where you live. This is what you're living with. What can you find there? People find amazing things.
Any more questions? Now it's open to everybody who is right now here with us, not only Shenkar students.
Yes, I have a question. Another one. Well, first, hi, Annea. It's really good seeing you.
It's lovely to see you.
I want to just say that I was lucky enough to see the Danube installation a month ago in Athens, and the experience, I know the recording, but the experience of being inside the installation was a completely different experience for me in terms of the connection to the sounds and getting some idea of movement that I felt was very, very present in the room. And I also really noticed what you were talking about, that in the recording process, you were looking for sounds that you haven't heard before. It was very present. And at first I was like, okay, it's, you know, how many new different sounds can you get out of a river? But I sat there for a really long time, and it really, you know, once you get into it and starting to pay attention to the details in each of those recordings, and you really realize that each of them is really, really different. And I feel like that kind of experience or feeling of sound was only available after like a longer listening process, perhaps. But I guess what I was wanting to ask is related to rivers, but it may be also related to the first question about sounds that you can't control, that Naomi asked, I think. And I feel like it's something that you do also a lot with recent works, especially I'm thinking about the piece for Nate, the Becoming Air, the solo trumpet piece. And there is something in the process of thinking. Maybe I want to ask you if you find yourself, after so many years of listening and thinking about rivers, if you find yourself thinking like a river also when you're writing a piece for, you know, an instrument, and maybe what does that mean for you?
To be thinking like a river. Oh, wow. If I felt I could consciously do that, oh, that would be
maybe wonderful. Subconscious process.
Maybe. Nate and I, that piece is deeply collaborative. So we made the piece together, and it keeps changing. Let me think where to start with that. A starting point for both of us was precisely our fascination with sounds which evolve in a way which is beyond your control. Sounds which you can initiate, you set the energy going, and then the instrument, the sound will go places you would not have expected. We're both fascinated with that. And so that was our starting point, and the piece is built upon that reality, sort of unleashing sounds which then have as it were, a life of their own. And which is something I had discovered years before with glass, that I could set a piece of glass vibrating, but I couldn't be totally sure how the sound would change and shift during the course of a sequence of vibration. And I loved that. So then it felt like playing in concert with the glass, like a sort of free improv, that I would get the glass going, and then it would do what that intensity of vibration led to in the sound. And I could just sort of sit back and keep it vibrating, but then just watch what happens. And that goes back further to when I was a student, really, when I was finishing my student years as a composer, and had been studying electronic music in Bilthoven with Koenig, who was a great teacher, and concluding that I really wasn't very interested in the sounds that I, at any rate, was able to assemble in the studio. They didn't seem to have a life to them. And asking myself, so what do I mean by a sound being alive? Even back then, I was focused on that. And what sounds do have a life, quality of life in them. And they were environmental sounds, ambient sounds. sounds not generated by me, not triggered by me, because not controlled by me. So that the shapes that these sounds would take, that I became fascinated by listening to, were shapes, and the details which accumulate in them were way more complex than anything I could think up to do in the studio, and much more interesting. So it sort of started that way back then. Sounds that you can't control, they're fascinating. And it doesn't mean, and it does not mean letting feedback get out of hand. Although that can be interesting too. So Nate and I are both fascinated with that, and that was a great starting point. So it was a matter of finding sounds that we wanted to unleash. And he's wonderful. I mean, he's a beautiful listener. He's a beautiful sound artist. So he's a great person to work with. Did the same thing with yarn wire in Into the Vanishing Point. Very much the same process. Only there were 5 of us working together. It's a great process. It's fun.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, I hear a lot of similarities to River in this way of working, and in the and what it means to, when you play it, to be present at the moment and to really listen and feel, where is this, energy of sound going now? And something in the flow too. For me, from looking, I guess, from afar, at least a bit at different works, I see this nice thread of river thinking in all of your works.
Oh, that is lovely. Thank you. Thank you. And do you find it in your own work?
In my own work? Perhaps, but perhaps it's coming from a different place. Like, I don't know if I would associate it necessarily with rivers, but I think it does generate some quality of sound and some state of mind of when you're performing and listening, that it is also that I'm really interested in my own work. Yeah,
I can hear it in your work.
Annea, I would end up this meeting by saying, wow, what a pleasure and honor it was to have you here. A dream coming true for me.
Oh, thank you. And wonderful to have a chance to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to getting to know each other better. That would be great.
Thank you. I would like to thank all my students who are here for having this semester with me. This was our final last lesson together. You all know how to reach for me if you need any help. And thank you for being here too. And again, Annea, where are you? I've lost you. Here you are.
Around.
Thank you for this lovely, lovely, lovely meeting. It was the best party I could think of.
I wish
Thank
you all
so much.
Great pleasure. Wishing you all a great intercession, a relaxing intercession.